This is Really American. I am Michael Hayne. Let's get to it. Just when you thought Trump couldn't possibly be any more of a despicable, vile, grotesque, stage 5, cancerous, malignant, narcissistic, sociopathic, screaming fascist orange swamp monster, and that's actually the abridged version, we learn that his nephew, Fred, recently published a book in which he details how his uncle allegedly told him that he wishes that some disabled people would just die, including Fred's very own nephew. Wow. Fred C. Trump III, the son of Trump's late brother, Fred Trump Jr., yeah, not a lot of originality there, makes the claim in his new memoir, All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way, that Donald Trump also apparently tossed around the N word quite casually in conversation, which that doesn't seem far fetched because there's a lot of credible reporting about Donald doing that as well. William, the son of Donald Trump's nephew Fred, apparently was born with some genetic mutation. Anyway, so Trump's nephew apparently met with Trump in the Oval Office. There were some disability advocates there, along with Trump's then Secretary of Health and Human Services. According to Fred, he thought that he actually thought that his uncle, because he's ever so sensitive and he constantly shows what like a sweet, cuddly man he is, that he would have been touched by what transpired in that meeting, and everything that was discussed about people with disabilities. But guess what? What do you think actually happened? Instead, the human garbage said, these people, with the shape they're in and all the expenses, maybe they should just die. A true Hallmark card, right? I mean, it's not like Donald Trump has a spotty history of ever saying anything remotely negative about disabled people, right? Oh.
Donald Trump provoking fresh outrage. This time, the Republican frontrunner is accused of mocking a reporter who has a physical disability. Trump, however, says he doubts he ever actually met the reporter in question. And Tom has more on that story. Good morning again.
Dan, good morning to you. All over the country, Trump tells his crowds how much he hates the media, that 70% of journalists are dishonest. Then he imitates some reporters he personally can't stand. It's all part of the Trump stump speech, but now some are saying Trump may have crossed the line just to get some laughs. In a campaign of firsts, Donald Trump appearing to go where no presidential candidate has gone before. The Republican frontrunner at a rally in South Carolina this week appearing to mock a journalist who is disabled.
And now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
That reporter, the New York Times' Serge Kovaleski, who has a chronic condition affecting his joints that limits flexibility in his arms.
Shouldn't that have been it right there? Shouldn't that ended that clown show 8 years ago? Anybody else? If that were anybody else, end of story, done, campaign finished, no question about it. Trump, it's a good thing that he never, said anything remotely bad about anyone with a disability again, right?
Attention to something I found really interesting, and it came up during his remarks in Newton, Iowa yesterday. He vowed to find an alternative to Obamacare if elected in 2024, and as part of those remarks, he criticized the late Senator John McCain and blamed him for Republicans' failure to repeal and replace the law in 2017. And part of that delivery, Trump mocked McCain's injuries. Take a listen to what he said.
We're going to fight for much better health care than Obamacare. Obamacare is a catastrophe. Nobody talks about it. Without John McCain, we would have had it done. But John McCain, for some reason, couldn't get his arm up that day. Remember? He goes that like that. That was the end of that.
Obamacare? Terrible. It's so unpopular. Millions and millions suddenly have health care. Love it. Tried to be repealed multiple times. Didn't work. Law of the land. Okay, but Trump, I didn't offer anything. I said I was going to repeal and replace. I was going to put in Trump don't care. Never happened.
Now, if anyone knows about what a massive, colossal piece of shit Trump is, I think it's Mary Trump. She also happened to pen a book on what a disastrous, monstrous piece of shit Trump is. I guess that's like a theme in the extended Trump family, you know? You just come of age and you're like, hey, my uncle's a colossal piece of shit. Let me write a book about it. Anyway, there was one thing that she said not too long ago that really stood out and perhaps explains what a vile, sociopathic, amoral nut job Trump is and the root of his cruelty. Let's hear that.
So my uncle Rob, who is not a particularly nice person, got up and starts toasting Donald, and he kept referring to him as Mr. President. It was quite embarrassing, especially given the fact that everybody at that table knew that the two of them couldn't stand each other. And finally, it was Marianne's turn to make a toast. So she thanked everybody for being there, and then towards the end of her brief remarks, she said, "Remember when Freddie," meaning my dad, "dumped the bowl of mashed potatoes on Donald's head because he wouldn't stop tormenting Rob." Everybody at that table, or at least everybody in the family, my aunts, uncles, brother, cousins, knew that mashed potato story. We refer to it, in fact, as the legendary mashed potato story. So we all laughed because on the one hand, it was sort of an homage to my dad, who'd been dead since I was 16. And it was a way for Marianne to get under Donald's skin because Donald hated that story. And he did not laugh. In fact, what he did was cross his arms and pout. And he didn't stop pouting until the subject had been changed. So what actually was the mashed potato story? It wasn't just that my dad had dumped a bowl of mashed potatoes on Donald's head. It was why and what the aftermath of that was. So they were about 7 or 8 years apart. My dad was the oldest son. Marianne was the oldest child. So there was a fair age gap between Marianne and my dad and Donald and Robert, who were the two youngest. They were waiting for dinner. My grandmother was in the kitchen fixing dinner for the 5 children, herself, my grandfather, and my great-grandmother, who basically was there for every meal. She lived just a couple of blocks down the road in a building my grandfather owned. And Donald was engaged in one of his favorite activities, tormenting his little brother, Robert, who was about 1.5 years younger. So at the time, I think Donald was around 6 or 7. So my dad would have been 13, 14-ish. And Rob was 5. And also very frail, very skinny, very pale, and very thin-skinned, figuratively, if not literally. And Robert just loved to tease him and belittle him. And as often was the case, Robert was crying hysterically and screaming, and nobody could get Donald to stop it. Especially my grandmother, because Donald had no respect for his mother. He didn't listen to a word she said. And even her threatening my grandfather didn't do any good. So everybody was losing their patience. And my grandmother keeps bringing the food onto the table set. And finally, in just a fit of frustration, my dad did the only thing he could think of to do to make it stop. He picked up what must have been a quite massive bowl of mashed potatoes that my grandmother had just put on the table. Because remember, this is a dinner for 8 people. And he dumped it on Donald's head.
Could somebody get a flux capacitor so we can go back in time and witness that unfold in real time? Basically, Mary Trump is confirming the root of his cruelty, how he always picked on anyone who was slightly disadvantaged, thus explaining why he continues to do so, will never evolve, and is basically the same piece of shit he was years ago. Well, I'm Michael Hayne. This is Really American. If you like our content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Talk to you later.